They put handcuffs on the hands that were painting a queen. That was their first mistake. They didn't know the man who hired him didn't just own the building, he owned the whole city block. The hiss of the spray can was a prayer in the alley, a rhythmic whisper of color against the grimy brick canvas of a forgotten wall on the corner of Redemption and Grace. For Kai, every stroke was a memory, every mist of paint a ghost of a story. He was painting his grandmother, a woman whose spirit was too vast to be contained in a church or a cemetery. So he was giving her a kingdom on a wall that had only ever known decay. Her eyes, a universe of wisdom and tough love, were just beginning to emerge from the nebula of primer gray when the world shattered into flashes of red and blue. Two officers, one old and one young, stepped out of the patrol car like it was their stage. The older one, Miller, had a face carved from years of cynicism. He moved with the slow, deliberate swagger of a man who believed his badge made him a king. The younger one, Evans, was a shadow, eager and uncertain, his hand already resting on his holster as if he'd been waiting his whole life for a reason to draw it. "Well, well," Miller's voice cut through the quiet night, thick with condescension. "Look what we have here. Another Banksy wannabe." Kai didn't flinch. He didn't turn. He just pulled his hand back from the wall, the nebula black spray can still clutched in his fingers. The scent of aerosol and wet concrete hung in the air, a perfume of creation now soured by the intrusion. "Turn around," Miller commanded, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "Hands on the wall." Kai did as he was told, placing his palms flat against the cool brick, careful not to smudge the fresh paint that felt as sacred as skin. He could feel their eyes on his back, not seeing a man, not seeing an artist, but a type, a problem, a piece of graffiti to be scrubbed away. "What's this mess supposed to be, huh?" Miller sneered, prodding the mural with the tip of his nightstick. The stick left a small, ugly scar on the cheek of the queen, a desecration. Kai's jaw tightened. "It's a portrait." "A portrait of what?" "Your girlfriend," Evans chimed in, trying to match his partner's derisive tone. "My grandmother," Kai said, his voice low and steady, a single anchor in a sea of disrespect. He could feel her watching him, not from the wall, but from somewhere beyond it. He'd promised her he'd make something beautiful in a world that had shown them so little of it. Miller let out a short, humorless laugh. "Your grandmother. Right. You think that sob story is gonna get you out of a vandalism charge." He grabbed Kai's arm, twisting it behind his back with a practiced roughness. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into Kai's wrists. The hands that held spray cans like wands that could spin stories from light and shadow were now shackled. The crowd had started to form, a small gathering of late-night commuters and curious residents drawn by the flashing lights. Phones came out, their small red recording lights blinking like malevolent eyes. This was part of the ritual, the public shaming. Defacing private property, resisting arrest if you so much as breathe wrong, Miller narrated as he pushed Kai toward the car. "You're going away for a while, kid. Give you plenty of time to work on your art." The insult was meant to break him, to shrink him down to the size of their assumptions. But as they shoved him against the side of the patrol car, his cheek pressed against the cold metal, Kai wasn't thinking about jail. He was thinking about the unfinished gold halo he was supposed to paint around his grandmother's head. A crown she had earned through a lifetime of quiet sacrifice. He had one can of it, a custom mix he called Regal Gold, tucked into his backpack. It felt like the last piece of his soul. The weight of the handcuffs was a familiar ghost, not his own, but the collective weight of every story his grandmother had ever told him. Stories of his grandfather, a carpenter whose hands could build a house but were deemed unworthy to shake a white man's. Stories of his father, a poet whose words were silenced before they could ever find a page. Kai's art was his rebellion. It was the continuation of their silenced legacies. He didn't paint on canvas because canvas was polite, contained. He painted on walls because walls were public, they screamed. They couldn't be ignored. His grandmother, Elena, was the one who had given him his first sketchbook. He was 7, a boy with too much fire in his belly and no chimney for the smoke. While other kids were outside, he was inside, drawing. He drew the cracks in the pavement, the tired faces of people on the bus, the single weed that grew defiantly from a split in the concrete. Elena never called it a hobby. She called it testifying. "You see things, baby," she'd say, her voice like warm honey. "Don't just see them. Show them. Let the world know you were here." When he was 15, he'd saved up for months to buy a set of professional spray paints. He practiced on abandoned freight trains down by the river, learning to control the spray to make the lines sing. His first piece was a tribute to her, her hands, wrinkled and strong, holding a single gardenia. He signed it Cairo, a name he'd given himself that meant victorious one. He was claiming a future he hadn't yet seen. Art school was a dream that died before it could breathe. The rejection letters came one by one, their thin envelopes feeling heavier than bricks. "Technically proficient but lacks classical foundation," one said. "Raw but undisciplined," said another. They were polite ways of saying his art, born of the street, had no place in their hallowed halls. So he made the streets his gallery. He worked 2 dead-end jobs, one stocking shelves at a grocery store, the other washing dishes. Every dollar he saved going toward paint. His hands were perpetually stained, a kaleidoscope of colors that wouldn't wash away. They were the marks of his devotion. The wall on redemption and grace was different. It wasn't an act of rebellion. It was an act of love. The building had been abandoned for years, a husk of a community center where his grandmother had volunteered every Tuesday. When she passed, the grief was a physical thing, a void that threatened to swallow him whole. He couldn't build her a monument of stone, so he decided to build one of light and color. He spent weeks sketching her face, trying to capture the look in her eyes that was both a gentle caress and an unyielding fire. He wanted people to see her not as she was at the end, frail and tired, but as she was in his memory, a queen. He didn't ask for permission to paint the wall. He felt it was his right, his inheritance, a final testament to the woman who had taught him how to see. Now, cuffed and humiliated, the smell of cheap air freshener from the police car filling his nostrils, he felt a flicker of the old doubt. Maybe the rejection letters were right. Maybe he was just a kid with a spray can making a mess. Maybe he was just another statistic, another body to be processed by the system. He glanced at the mural, incomplete, her eyes watching him. A wave of shame washed over him. He had failed her. The crowd was growing larger, the whispers louder. A young woman with bright pink hair stepped forward, her phone held high. "That's Cairo," she yelled, her voice cutting through the noise. "He's a real artist. I follow him online." Miller turned, his eyes narrowing at her. "Ma'am, step back or you'll be obstructing justice." "But you don't understand," she insisted. People pay for his work. He's not a vandal." "Everyone's a critic," Miller grunted, shoving Kai into the back of the car. He slammed the door, the sound a definitive, metallic thud. The world outside became a distorted tableau through the reinforced glass. The flashing lights, the curious faces, the mural of his grandmother, all of it swimming behind a barrier he couldn't break. The smug look on Miller's face was one of finality. He had won. He had restored order. He had taken a piece of chaos and put it in a cage. He leaned against the car, talking into his radio, reporting the arrest. "One in custody for vandalism." "Yeah, another one. We're bringing him in." He was savoring the moment, the small, petty victory. He looked back at the wall, at the half-finished portrait of the black woman with the sad, knowing eyes. "What a waste of paint," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. He wasn't prepared for the silence. It descended without warning. A hush fell over the crowd, so sudden and complete that the only sound was the crackle of Miller's own radio. The flashing lights of the patrol car seemed to pulse in a vacuum. Every head, every phone turned in the same direction. A car had pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a police car. It was a black sedan, a Bentley, so silent and sleek it seemed to have absorbed the night around it. The engine wasn't running. It had glided to a stop as if by magic. The back door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, in his late 60s, wearing a suit so exquisitely tailored it looked like a second skin. His hair was a distinguished silver, and he moved with a grave, unhurried grace that commanded more attention than any siren. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the police car. His eyes were fixed on one thing, the mural. Miller straightened up, his hand instinctively going to his belt. "Sir, this is a police matter. You need to stay back." The man didn't seem to hear him. He took slow, deliberate steps toward the wall, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the gritty pavement. He stopped directly in front of the portrait of Alina, his hands clasped behind his back. He stood there for a long moment, a statue of contemplation amidst the chaos. Inside the car, Kai watched, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He didn't know this man. He had never seen him before. Finally, the man turned. His gaze swept over the scene, the gawking crowd, the young Officer Evans who looked like he wanted to disappear, and finally, Officer Miller. His eyes were calm, but they carried a weight that made Miller's authority feel cheap and flimsy. "An arrest for what, exactly?" the man asked. His voice was quiet, a low baritone, yet it carried across the alley with the force of a judge's gavel. Miller, flustered by the man's sheer presence, puffed out his chest. "Vandalism, sir. This young man was defacing private property." He gestured toward Kai in the back of the car with a dismissive flick of his thumb. The man's eyes followed the gesture, and for the first time he looked directly at Kai. A flicker of something, recognition, sadness, understanding, passed through his gaze. Then he looked back at Miller. "My property," he said. The two words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Miller's confident posture faltered. He blinked. I'm sorry. This building," the man clarified, his voice still unnervingly calm, "is my property. I own this one and the 5 next to it." He paused, letting the information land. The crowd let out a collective, soft gasp. The pink-haired girl's phone was shaking slightly. Miller's face, which had been a mask of smug control, was beginning to crumble. "Sir, we had a report of a trespasser." "That wasn't a trespasser," the man said, turning his attention back to the mural. "That was a commission." Miller stared, his mouth slightly agape. A what? The man finally looked Miller directly in the eyes. The placid calm was gone, replaced by a glint of cold, hard steel. I paid that young man, he said, pointing a single, elegant finger toward the patrol car, $100,000 to paint that mural. Silence. Not the hushed, expectant silence from before, but a dead, echoing void. The sound of a universe shifting on its axis. Miller's face went from confused to pale to a deep, blotchy red. Officer Evans looked like he was going to be physically sick. The crowd was frozen, a gallery of stunned faces lit by the strobing police lights. Inside the car, Kai felt the air leave his lungs. $100,000. The words didn't make sense. It was a number so far beyond his reality it sounded like a foreign language. The man, Mr. Sterling, wasn't finished. His voice dropped even lower, becoming more intimate, more devastating. He walked closer to Miller, forcing the officer to meet his gaze. You called his work a mess, I believe I heard you say. Miller swallowed hard, unable to speak. Sterling gestured to the mural, his expression softening as he looked at the face of the Queen. This mess, officer, is a portrait of my late wife, Elena Sterling, the woman for whom the Elena Sterling Community Arts Center, which was supposed to be housed in this very building, is named. A second shockwave ripped through the alley. It was a direct hit, a torpedo to the hull of Miller's entire worldview. He hadn't just insulted some street kid's graffiti. He had desecrated the memorial of a beloved community figure, commissioned by her powerful husband. He looked at the ugly scar his nightstick had left on the mural's cheek. It was no longer a scratch on a wall. It was an act of profound disrespect that now had a price tag and a powerful witness. Sterling's eyes flicked to the handcuffs on Kai's wrists, visible through the car window. You put my artist in chains. You damaged a six-figure work of art, and you did it all on my property. He let the words sink in, each one a nail in the coffin of Officer Miller's career. So I ask you again, Sterling said, his voice now a blade of ice. An arrest for what exactly? Miller didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stood there, stripped bare of his authority, his arrogance, his entire sense of self, while the whole world watched him unravel. The Queen on the wall stared down at him, her eyes seeming to hold a century of judgment. The handcuffs came off. The click of the metal releasing was the loudest sound in the alley. Officer Miller didn't look at Kai as he did it. He couldn't. His hands fumbled, his earlier bravado replaced by a tremor of pure panic. A superior officer had arrived on the scene, summoned not by a call for backup, but by the viral tidal wave already crashing through the city's digital landscape. The conversation was brief, quiet, and brutal. Miller and Evans were told to stand down. Their expressions were hollow. Their careers were over. Mr. Sterling opened the back door of the patrol car himself. He didn't offer a hand to help Kai out. It was a gesture of respect, an acknowledgement that Kai could stand on his own. Kai stepped out, rubbing his wrists, the red marks on his skin a stark reminder of the last Iowa. He looked at Sterling, the question still hanging in his eyes. You're Cairo, Sterling said. It wasn't a question. I've been following your work for years. Your tribute to the forgotten factory workers on the South Side. The phoenix you painted on the wall of the library after the fire. Kai was speechless. This man, this titan of industry, knew his anonymous street name. Elena, my wife, Sterling's voice softened, the grief still fresh. She was your biggest fan. She had printouts of your work taped up in her study. She said you painted the truth. Before she passed, she made me promise I would find you. She wanted you to be the one to bring this place back to life. He looked at the mural, his eyes misty. She said you would know how to paint her, not just her face, her spirit. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded check. He didn't hand it to Kai, he just held it. The $100,000 is real, half now, half on completion, but that's just the fee. We also established the Alina Sterling Grant for Public Artists. It's a $250,000 fund to support artists like you. Artists the world tries to ignore. He paused. You're the first recipient. Kai stared at the check, then at Sterling, then at the mural of his grandmother. His grandmother. The pieces clicked into place with a staggering, heart-stopping clarity. He had been painting his grandmother, Alina, and this man's wife was also named Alina. It wasn't a coincidence. It was something more. My grandmother's name was Alina, too, Kai whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Sterling's eyes widened. A slow, sad smile spread across his face. Of course it was, he said softly, as if it was the only thing that could possibly make sense in a broken world. Great women often share a name. He finally placed a gentle, fatherly hand on Kai's shoulder. Finish your work, son. The world needs to see her. The crowd, which had been a ring of accusers, was now a circle of witnesses. They watched in reverent silence as Kai walked back to his gear. The police were gone. The noise was gone. There was only the wall, the night, and the prayer of the spray can. He picked up the can of regal gold. His hands were steady now. He stepped up to the wall and with a single, fluid motion, painted a magnificent, glowing crown above his grandmother's head. It wasn't just a halo. It was an affirmation. He stepped back, looking at the completed masterpiece. The queen on the wall looked back at him, her eyes full of the fire, the love, the resilience he had finally managed to capture. She was home. Some kings don't wear crowns, they carry spray cans.